Hello, my darlings. Mother Raven here with part 2 of Youth by Issac Asimov from 1952. The astronomer entered the dining room with decorum. He felt very much the guest. He said, "Where are the youngsters? My son isn't in his room." The industrialist smiled. "They've been out for hours. However, breakfast was forced into them among the women some time ago, so there's nothing to worry about. Youth, doctor, youth." Youth. The word seemed to depress the astronomer. They ate breakfast in silence. The industrialist said once, "You really think they'll come? The day looks so normal." The astronomer said, "They'll come." And that was all. Afterward, the industrialist said, "You'll pardon me. I can't conceive you're playing so elaborate a hoax. You really spoke to them? As I speak to you, at least in a sense. They can project thoughts. I gathered that must be so from your letter. How, I wonder? I could not say. I asked them, of course, and they were vague. Or perhaps it was just I could not understand. It involves a projector for the focusing of thoughts, and even more than that, conscious attention on the part of both projector and receptor. It was quite a while before I realized they were trying to think at me. Such thought projectors may be part of the science they will give us." "Perhaps," said the industrialist. "Yet think of the changes it would bring to society. A thought projector." "Why not? Change would be good for us." "I don't think so. It is not only in old age that change is unwelcome," said the astronomer, "and races can be old as well as individuals." The industrialist pointed out the window. "You see that road? It was built before the wars, but I don't know exactly when. It's as good now as it was the day it was built. We couldn't possibly duplicate it now. The race was young when it was built." "Huh? Then, yes, at least they weren't afraid of new things." "No, I wish they had been. Where is the society of before the wars? Destroyed, doctor. What good were youth and new things? We're better off now. The world is peaceful and jogs along. The race goes nowhere, but after all, there is nowhere to go. They proved that. The men who built the road. I will speak with your visitors as I agreed, if they come. But I think I will only ask them to go." "The race is not going nowhere," said the astronomer earnestly. "It is going toward final destruction. My university has a smaller student body each year. Fewer books are written, less work is done. An old man sleeps in the sun. His days are peaceful and unchanging, but each day finds him nearer death all the same." "Well, well," said the industrialist. "No, don't dismiss it. Listen. Before I wrote you, I investigated your position in the planetary economy, and you found me solvent," interrupted the industrialist, smiling. "Why, yes, you see, you are joking, and yet perhaps the joke is not far off. You are less solvent than your father, and he was less solvent than his father. Perhaps your son will no longer be solvent. It becomes too troublesome for the planet to support even the industries that still exist, though they are toothpicks to the oak trees of before the war. We will be back to village economy, and then what? The caves? And the infusion of fresh technological knowledge will be changing all of that. Not just the new knowledge, rather the whole effect of change, of a broadening horizons. Look, sir, I choose you to approach this matter, not only because you're rich and influential with government officials, but because you had an unusual reputation for these days of daring to break with tradition. Our people will resist change, and you would know how to handle them, how to see to it that That the youth of the race is revived? Yes, with atomic bombs. The atomic bombs, returned the astronomer, need not be the end of civilization. These visitors of mine had their atomic bomb, or whatever their equivalent was, on their own worlds, and survived it, because they didn't give up. Don't you see? It wasn't the bomb that defeated us, but our own shell shock. This may be the last chance to reverse the process. Tell me, said the industrialist, what do these friends from space want in return? The astronomer hesitated. He said, I will be truthful with you. They come from a denser planet. Ours is rich in lighter atoms. They want magnesium? Aluminum? No, sir. Carbon and hydrogen. They want coal and oil. Really? The astronomer said quickly, You're going to ask why creatures who have mastered space travel, and therefore atomic power, would want coal and oil. I can't answer that. The industrialist smiled. But I can. This is the best evidence yet of the truth of your story. Superficially, atomic power would seem to preclude the use of coal and oil. However, quite apart from the energy gained by their combustion, they remain, and always will remain, the basic raw materials for all organic chemistry. Plastics, dyes, pharmaceuticals, solvents, industry could not exist without them, even in an atomic age. Still, if coal and oil are the low price for which they would sell us the troubles and tortures of racial youth, my answer is that the commodity would be dear if offered gratis. The astronomer sighed and said, There are the boys. They were visible through the open window, standing together in the grassy field and lost in animated conversation. The industrialist's son pointed imperiously, and the astronomer's son nodded and made off at a run towards the house. The industrialist said, There is the youth you speak of. Our race has as much of it as it ever had. Yes, but we age them quickly and pour them into the mold. Slim scuttled into the room, the door banging behind him. The astronomer said in mild disapproval, What's this? Slim looked up in surprise and came to a halt. I beg your pardon. I didn't know anyone was here. I am sorry to have interrupted. His enunciation was almost painfully precise. The industrialist said, It's all right, youngster. But the astronomer said, Even if you had been entering an empty room, son, there would be no cause for slamming a door. Nonsense, insisted the industrialist. The youngster's done no harm. You're simply scolding him for being young. You with your views, he said to Slim. Come here, lad. Slim advanced slowly. How do you like the country, eh? Very much, sir, thank you. My son has been showing you about the place, hasn't he? Yes, sir. No, call him Red. I call him that myself. Now tell me, what are you two up to, eh? Slim looked away. Why, just exploring, sir. The industrialist turned to the astronomer. There you are. Youthful curiosity and adventure lust. The race has not yet lost it. Slim said, Sir? Yes, lad. The youngster took a long time to get on with it. He said, Red sent me in for something good to eat, but I don't know exactly what he meant. I didn't like to say so. Why, just ask the cook. She'll have something good for you young'uns to eat. Oh, no, sir, I meant for animals. For animals? Yes, sir. What do animals eat? The astronomer said, I'm afraid my son is city bred. Well, said the industrialist, there's no harm in that. What kind of animal, lad? A small one, sir. Then try grass or leaves, and if they don't want that, nuts or berries would probably do the trick. Thank you, sir. Slim ran out again, closing the door gently behind him. The astronomer said, Do you suppose they've trapped an animal alive? He was obviously perturbed. That's common enough. There's no shooting on my estate, and it's a tame country, full of rodents and small creatures. Red is always coming home with pets of one sort or another. They rarely maintain his interest for long. He looked at the wall clock. Your friends should have been here by now, shouldn't they? The swaying had come to a halt, and it was dark. The explorer was not comfortable in the alien air. It felt as thick as soup, and he had to breathe shallowly. Even so, he reached out in a sudden need for company. The merchant was warm to the touch. His breathing was rough. He moved in an occasional spasm and was obviously asleep. The explorer hesitated and decided not to wake him. It would serve no real purpose. There would be no rescue, of course. That was the penalty paid for high profits, which unrestrained competition could lead to. The merchant who opened a new plant could have a 10-year monopoly of its trade, which he might hug to himself or, more likely, rent out to all comers at a stiff price. It followed that planets were searching for in secrecy, and preferably away from the usual trade routes. In a case such as theirs, then, there was little or no chance that another ship would come in range of their sub-etherics, except for the most improbable of coincidences. Even if they were in their ship, that is, rather than in this cage. The explorer grasped the thick bars. Even if they blasted those away as they could, they would be stuck too high in the open air for leaping. It was too bad. They had landed twice before in the scout ship. They had established contact with the natives, who were grotesquely huge, but mild and unaggressive. It was obvious that they had once owned a flourishing technology, but hadn't faced up to the consequences of such a technology. It would have been a wonderful market. And it was a tremendous world. The merchant, especially, had been taken back. He had known the figures that expressed the planet's diameter, but from a distance of 2 light seconds, he had stood at the visiplate and muttered, "Unbelievable." "Oh, there are larger worlds," the explorer said. It wouldn't do for an explorer to be too easily impressed. "Inhabited?" "Well, no. Why, you could drop your planet into that large ocean and drown it." The explorer smiled. It was a gentle dig at his Arcturian homeland, which was smaller than most planets. He said, "Not quite." The merchant followed along the line of his thoughts. "And the inhabitants are large in proportion to their world?" He sounded as though the news struck him less favorably now. "Nearly 10 times our height." "Are you sure they're friendly?" "That's hard to say. Friendship between alien intelligence is an imponderable. They are not dangerous, I think. We've come across other groups that could not maintain equilibrium after the atomic war stage, and you know the results. Introversion, retreat, gradual decadence, and increasing gentleness. Even if they are such monsters, the principle remains." It was about then that the explorer felt the heavy throbbing of the engines. He frowned and said, "We are descending a bit too quickly." There had been some speculation on the dangers of landing some hours before. The planetary target was a huge one for an oxygen water world, though it lacked the size of the uninhabitable hydrogen-ammonia planets, and its low density made its surface gravity fairly normal. Its gravitational forces fell off, but slowly with distance. In short, its gravitational potential was high, and the ship's calculator was a run-of-the-mill model, not designed to plot landing trajectories at that potential range. That meant the pilot would have to use manual controls. It would have been wiser to install a more high-powered model, but that would have meant a trip to some outpost of civilization, Lost time, perhaps a lost secret. The merchant demanded an immediate landing. The merchant felt it was necessary to defend his position now. He said angrily to the explorer, "Don't you think the pilot knows his job? He landed you safely twice before." Yes, thought the explorer, in a scout ship, not in this unmaneuverable freighter. Aloud he said nothing. He kept his eye on the visiplate. They were descending too quickly. There was no room for doubt, much too quickly. The merchant said peevishly, "Why do you keep silent?" "Well then, if you wish to speak to me, I would suggest that you strap on your floater and help me prepare the ejector." The pilot fought a noble fight. He was no beginner. The atmosphere, abnormally high and thick, in the gravitational potential of this world, whipped and burned about the ship. But to the very last it looked as though he might bring it under control despite that. He even maintained course, following the extrapolated line to the point on the northern continent towards which they were headed. Under other circumstances, with a shade more luck, the story would eventually have been told and retold as a heroic and masterly reversal of a lost situation. But within sight of victory, tired body and tired nerves clamped a control bar with a shade too much pressure. The ship, which had almost leveled off, dipped down again. There was no room to retrieve the final error. There was only a mile left to fall. The pilot remained at his post to the actual landing, his only thought that of breaking the force of the crash, of maintaining the space-worthiness of the vessel. He did not survive. With the ship bucking madly in a soupy atmosphere, few ejectors could be mobilized, and only one of them in a time. When afterwards the explorer lifted out of unconsciousness and rose to his feet, he had the definite feeling that but for himself and the merchant, there were no survivors. And perhaps there was an overcalculation. His floater had burned out while still sufficiently distant from the surface to have the fall stun him. The merchant might have had even less luck. He was surrounded by a world of thick, ropey stalks of grass, and in the distance were trees that reminded him vaguely of similar structures on his native Arcturian world, except that their lowest branches were high above what he would consider normal treetops. He called, his voice sounding basso in the thick air, and the merchant answered. The explorer made his way towards him, thrusting violently at the coarse stalks that barred his path. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The merchant grimaced. "I've sprained something. It hurts to walk." The explorer probed gently. "I don't think anything is broken. You'll have to walk despite the pain. Can we rest first? It's important to try to find the ship. If it's space-worthy, or if it can be repaired, we may live. Otherwise, we won't. Just a few minutes. Let me catch my breath." The explorer was glad enough for those few minutes. The merchant's eyes were already closed. He allowed his to do the same. He heard the trampling and his eyes snapped open. Never sleep on a strange planet, he told himself futilely. The merchant was awake too, and his steady screaming was a rumble of terror. The explorer called, "It's only a native of this planet. It won't harm you." But even as he spoke, the giant had swooped down, and in a moment they were in its grasp, being lifted closer to its monstrous ugliness. The merchant struggled violently, and of course quite futilely. "Can't you talk to it?" he yelled. The explorer could only shake his head. "I can't reach it with the projector. It won't be listening." "Then blast it! Blast it down!" "We can't do that." The phrase, "you fool," had almost been added. The explorer struggled to keep his self-control. They were swallowing space as the monster moved purposefully away. "Why not?" cried the merchant. "You can reach your blaster. I can see it in plain sight. Don't be afraid of falling." "It's simpler than that. If this monster is killed, you'll never get trade with this planet. You'll never even leave it. You probably won't live the day out." "Why? Why?" "Because this is one of the young of the species. You should know what happens when a trader kills a native young, even accidentally. What's more, if this is the target point, then we are on the estate of a powerful native. This might be one of his brood." That was how they entered their present prison. They had carefully burnt away a portion of the thick, stiff covering, and it was obvious that the height from which they were suspended was a killing one. Now, once again, the prison cage shuddered and lifted in an upward arc. The merchant rolled to the lower rim and startled awake. The cover lifted and light flooded in. As was the case the time before, there were two specimens of the young. They were not very different in appearance from adults of the species, reflected the explorer, though of course they were considerably smaller. A handful of reedy green stalks was stuffed between the bars. Its odor was not unpleasant, but it carried clods of soil at its end. The merchant drew away and said huskily, "What are they doing?" The explorer said, "Trying to feed us, I should judge. At least this seems to be the native equivalent of grass." The cover was replaced, and they were set swinging again, alone with their fodder. So quoth this raven, and that was it for chapter 3 of this lovely little tale. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, and come around again. And I will see you next time, my darlings, under the trees.